Thank you all for joining us for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation's monthly economic briefing. Today, we are joined by the LAEDC CEO, Bill Allen, as well as the LAEDC's Institute for Applied Economics Director, Shannon Sedgwick. I'd now like to introduce Bill Allen.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for the latest in our monthly series of economic briefings on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic from our LAEDC Institute for Applied Economics. My colleague Shannon Sedgwick, who all of you know is the director of our institute, has prepared another thorough update for you, but I'll just offer a few brief comments before turning over the platform to Shannon. First of all, the news has been generally good here on both the health and economic fronts of the pandemic since we last met with you all in late March. Shannon will share in greater detail, but we continue to move to less restrictive tiers under our public health protocols as the number of new cases, hospitalizations, and deaths from the virus continue to decline here in LA County. We've made remarkable progress since our last monthly webinar, which was just 3 weeks ago, as we have now administered more than 6 million vaccine doses here in LA County. And I hope you will all join us in continuing to encourage family and friends to receive the vaccine, as reaching herd immunity will enable substantially more reopenings, allow our government to remove any remaining restrictions on businesses, and provide consumer confidence to get back into the marketplace and help fuel this largely consumer-driven economy back to pre-pandemic levels. Another encouraging sign for our signature motion picture industry here in LA, the feature film Godzilla vs. King Kong outperformed its market expectations for box office revenues by more than 50% during its recent 5-day opening weekend, despite the fact that it was simultaneously streamed on Warner Brothers' streaming service, HBO Max. This is a very good sign that the public is willing to return to theaters. And it's actually helped convince Regal Cinemas to announce that they will reopen 500 US theaters this spring. However, it's also important to note that our own LA-based Pacific theaters also announced last week that they have permanently closed all of their Pacific theaters and ArcLight cinemas, which indicates how severely smaller operators have been impacted by the pandemic, and reminds us all that our small business community is by no means yet out of the woods. They need continued attention and resources to fully recover from the devastating economic impacts of the pandemic. On the additional very good news front, the County of Los Angeles will be receiving about $1.9 billion from the American Rescue Plan, and the City of Los Angeles will receive a separate $1.35 billion. We're encouraging both of these local government partners to continue investing significant portions of that rescue capital, as defined in the language of the American Rescue Plan itself, to the still struggling survivors of this pandemic in our small and mid-sized business community, as well as to help the more than 500,000 of our neighbors who find themselves still unemployed 1 year after losing their jobs to the pandemic. And remember, those dollars coming directly to the city and county are largely by formula. There are hundreds of billions of additional dollars available throughout this plan that will be offered through competitive grants, including $28 billion for our struggling restaurant industry. And so we're encouraging our government partners and all of you on this call today who are our partners in economic development through this region to understand what's in this plan. In fact, in a minute, I'll put in the chat a federal investment guide prepared by Bruce Katz from Mayor Garcetti's Accelerator for America, a guide to understanding what is in this American Rescue Plan. We're using it at the LAEDC. We encourage all of you to use it to make sure that everyone in our region understands the variety of resources available, some which will come through state, county, or city government, some which will come through quasi-public agencies, some which will be received through competitive opportunities that we all have to either apply for or help others in our community apply for. That includes help for individuals, that includes help for small businesses, that includes help for entire industry sectors. Whenever we reach full reopening of our businesses in the months ahead, that will not equate to full recovery. That will take much longer, as so many of our most devastated sectors in this region depend on, for instance, travel and tourism as a significant part of their revenues. And both domestic travel and especially international travel are likely to be suppressed for many more months, if not years, as we await the continued vaccination of people throughout the world, which is not progressing as rapidly as it is in the US, UK, Israel, and certain other developed nations. And we also need to keep people safer at work as they return to the workplace. You see this logo my colleagues and I often have on our backgrounds. This is a program we have with Los Angeles County and the Workforce Development, Aging, and Community Services team to keep people safer in the workplace. We distribute information to small businesses throughout the region and large businesses throughout the region. Any employers, frankly, whether they're in the private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector, to remind them the ways they can keep their employees and their customers safer in the workplace. This will be critical to successful continued reopening of our economy. Last week, we talked about this and other strategies at our third annual 88 Cities Summit. We presented informative panels on recovery and reinvention strategies for our small businesses, opportunities to invest in our labor force here that powers our regional economy, particularly with upskilling and retraining opportunities for our 500,000 neighbors who are still seeking work in our still recovering economy. And finally, we presented several private and public sector speakers on the imperative of closing the digital divide here in LA County, as we believe it is essential to achieving truly inclusive economic recovery across Los Angeles County. Video highlights of that annual summit are available on our website, and we encourage you all to visit LAEDC.org to learn more. Lauren Markle, our colleague, I think, is posting them today and in the next couple of days. So if they're not all up there, they will be soon. So we do encourage you to visit LAEDC.org and listen in to those panels if you weren't among the 200 plus local government leaders and business leaders who came together last week to join that conversation. And finally, in that event, we invited the more than 200 participants in the event to join our new LA Digital Equity Action League, or LA Deal for short. This is a partnership that we and Unite LA have put together with more than 75 public and private partners, a partnership list that is growing literally every day. It has 4 working groups focused on removing the 4 basic barriers to universal high-speed internet adoption here in LA County. Those are about infrastructure deployment in rural unserved and urban underserved communities in our county. They're about the affordability of rate options available in our low-income communities. They're about appropriate devices, desktops, laptops, tablets that are needed to work remotely, learn remotely, access telehealth and other services. And they're about digital literacy training, how we can help more people to become literate in digital technologies. More than 130 of the 200 plus attendees of the 88 Cities Summit volunteered to join these working groups in the weeks ahead, and we hope that all of you will too. We are committed to not just closing over time, but literally eliminating the digital divide in LA County. We believe it's possible, but we believe it's going to take an unprecedented partnership of public and private sector stakeholders to achieve. And when we do, we are confident it will substantially enhance the equity of our regional economy and the robust growth opportunities of this economy. So to talk more about the economic impacts of the pandemic over the last year and what we see coming in the weeks and months ahead, I'm going to turn the platform over to the director of our Institute for Applied Economics, a woman you've all gotten to know well, who's helped us understand the path through health and economic impacts of this pandemic over the last year, our own Shannon Sedgwick. Shannon, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for LAEDC's monthly economic briefing. I hope you and your families are continuing to keep well and stay safe as we continue to make our way through this recovery. So today I am going to go over the latest local area employment situation in LA County, covering the month of March, and then share a little extra data for Los Angeles County afterwards. When the regional stay-at-home order was rescinded statewide back in January 25th, all counties fell back under the rules and framework of the Blueprint for a Safer Economy and its 4 color-coded tiers that indicate which activities and businesses are open based on local case rates, hospitalizations, and test positivity. As of April 13th, LA County is classified as Tier 3 when the risk of community disease transmission is considered moderate. This is the first time that Los Angeles County has moved into this less restrictive orange tier since the Blueprint for a Safer Economy was put forth. So under the orange, capacity restrictions ease even more with some indoor business operations open with modifications. California is making its way through this tiered system towards recovery. Remember, at our webinar in February, the Golden State was almost completely purple. And in March, most counties were in the red substantial tier. Today, 33 of the 58 counties in the state of California, including LA and the whole Southern California region, are in the third orange moderate tier. That's 83% of the state's population. They live in counties in the orange tier now. So currently, no county remains in the purple tier, and there's 22 counties that are still in the red moderate one. Over the weekend, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health reported over 1.2 million positive cases of COVID-19 across LA County, with less than 24,000 deaths. Continued lower case numbers are flattening out the curve, as you can see in the chart. On Friday, the Department of Public Health announced the 7-day average for daily new cases of COVID-19 dropped to 308. Over the weekend, it was reported that the daily test positivity rate of 0.9% was the lowest test positivity rate since the beginning of the pandemic. The test positivity rate, it peaked over 20% in late December during the surge. So this is quite an accomplishment. And current hospitalization numbers are also low. There are 498 people with COVID-19 currently hospitalized across the county, and 23% of these people are in the ICU. The distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in LA County continues. The county's administered close to 6.1 million doses of the vaccine as of last Tuesday, 35% of which are second doses. Vaccine eligibility categories have now been expanded to include anyone 16 and older who lives and works in LA County. Los Angeles County expanded the number of sites offering vaccination services across the county last week to 709 vaccination sites, with 266 of those sites in the hardest hit communities. As of April 9th, 71% of LA County residents aged 65 and older have received at least one dose of the vaccine. In total, 41% of the county's population aged 16 and older have received at least one dose of the vaccine. According to the latest data, the California EDD, Development Department, has processed close to 21.7 million claims since the pandemic began in March through the regular UI program, reopened and extension claims, as well as the separate Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, the PUA, with total unemployment benefits paid to California workers during the COVID-19 pandemic now reaching $137 billion. As of mid-February, about half of the workers who have claimed UI in California during the pandemic have claimed over 26 weeks of UI benefits, classifying them as long-term unemployed. And this represents close to 1 out of every 5 workers in the state. So this incidence of long-term unemployment is particularly high among workers who are Black, older, women, and less educated, and among PUA claimants, which are your independent contractors, your gig workers, or your sole proprietors. We're now seeing the number of UI claimants begin to decline at the state level as we move through the recovery process. But younger workers, Black workers, and women in the workforce continue to be disproportionately impacted. Since the start of COVID-19 in March of 2020, nearly 47% of the California workforce, and that's those who are in the labor force as of February 2020, 47% of those individuals have filed for unemployment insurance benefits. By now, you've probably heard the term the she session. Well, by February 27th, 51% of women in the labor force have filed a UI claim for regular UI or PUA since the start of the crisis, and that's compared to 44% of men. While we started to see a decline in the number of UI claims across the state, when we look at the UI claims data for Los Angeles County, we see a bit of a different experience, with 4 consecutive weeks of mild increases in UI claims. Though current claims, they still are significantly lower than the levels seen early on in the pandemic when safer at home order was most severe. From mid-March through the week ending April 10th, close to 6.9 million UI claims have been filed in Los Angeles County. If you look at these claims by industry, 16.5% of UI claims filed in the county were in the accommodation and food services industry, followed by retail trade with 12.7%, healthcare and social assistance with 12.2%, and information with 9.1%. Remember that healthcare and social assistance is a category that includes home healthcare as well as childcare. So both were impacted during the pandemic. And that the information sector includes our motion picture and television industry, where filming ground to a halt during the pandemic. The local area data release covering the month of March was released just last Friday. We'll go over the current employment situation for Los Angeles County. So the resident labor force is the sum of individuals employed and those who are classified as unemployed, people who are jobless, looking for a job and available for work. The civilian labor force fell by close to 22,000 over the month, landing at just over 5.1 million in March of 2021. Now, March is the second month, despite this decline, where the labor force has numbered over 5 million since February of last year. Here we have the monthly unemployment rate in Los Angeles County. May 2020 had the highest unemployment rate at 18.8%. However, the unemployment rate in the county remained above 17% from April through August. The rate declined from September to November, dipping up slightly in December and January as health orders were reinstated with restrictions during that second wave. February's unemployment rate declined, reflecting the loosening of those restrictions that were rescinded statewide on January 25th. Our unemployment rate remained unchanged from February to March at 10.9%. If we look at the trend of LA County's unemployment rate over the last year, we see the county's rate is still below the highest level seen during the Great Recession, which was 13.2% in September of 2010. So we're moving in the right direction. If we look at the monthly change in the unemployment rate, we see February was the first time the unemployment rate fell after 2 consecutive increases in December and January. And that in March, that rate did remain constant. In March, the rate is up 5.3 percentage points over March of last year, which was the beginning of the pandemic, and 6.4 percentage points over March of 2019. As we move into the later months of 2020, we're going to not only do a comparison of last year's month, but the year prior to get a handle on where the rates and job levels were before the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, we experienced the greatest job loss associated with the measures taken to mitigate the spread of the virus between March and April, when more than 772,000 jobs fell off of county non-farm payrolls. So since then, we've added just over 33% of those jobs back. This is up a little bit from last month as we were working our way through the phased reopening process, and we expect that to continue. So March continued to add non-farm employment in Los Angeles County. Over 34,000 non-farm jobs were added to the payroll beyond the gains experienced in February as restrictions remained suspended. Month over month, we saw 34,000 non-farm jobs added with gains in accommodation and food services and arts, entertainment, and recreation industries, which were two of some of the hardest hit industries. Combined, those two industries accounted for 39% of the 34,000 non-farm jobs gained over the month. Construction and finance and insurance, they experienced losses, very minor, between 300 and 500 jobs respectively. And although we are adding jobs back to payrolls on a monthly basis, we again see that overall employment in LA County is significantly down across many industries year over year. Almost all industry sectors have experienced employment contractions. Even though accommodation and food services added close to 10,000 jobs last month, the sector is still down by more than 116,000 jobs from last year. And again, if we look at year over year employment trends, we see those hardest hit industries are trending upward a bit, but still have quite a way to go before they reach pre-pandemic employment levels. Beyond the latest jobs numbers, I wanted to take a few minutes to share a few other metrics for LA County. As LA County makes its way through the 4 tiers of reopening, the number of new COVID cases remain low and more residents are getting vaccinated. So more LA County residents are actually getting out of the house. Overall, total time spent away from home, it's only down by 10.3% from pre-pandemic levels. Time spent in retail and restaurants is down by 23%, but you can see the upward trend. Time spent at work still remains 33.6% below pre-pandemic levels, as many continue to work remotely. And as people are getting out more, we see that consumer spending in Los Angeles has been rebounding, with spending for the week ending April 4th only 1.9% below spending in January 2020. While spending is rebounding, we see that small business revenues in Los Angeles, they are not rebounding. As of March 31st, total small business revenue is down 30.2% compared to January of 2020. And job postings data, it represents real-time employer demand for workers. As of April 9th, total job postings in Los Angeles, they're 13.7% below the number of postings in January of 2020. I just want to say that we're now a month beyond that year mark of when the Safer at Home order was issued on March 19th of 2020. The most severe impact in terms of jobs related to the health order was experienced in April of 2020 in the data, when over 714,000 non-farm jobs were shed from payrolls. So next month, we get to make a direct comparison of where employment stands in April of 2021 compared to the nadir of last year. Our recovery continues. We're moving through the tiered reopening process with low new case numbers and over 6 million and counting vaccinated in Los Angeles County. We're optimistic about where we are and where we will be next month in terms of our jobs and their numbers. That's barring an increase in the number of new cases. So remember to stay diligent and continue to take precautions because our economic recovery depends on it. So next, Bill and I will be answering questions.
Bill, the first one I'll toss over to you. And the question is from our friend Michelle Garrett. Bill mentioned a federal investment guide prepared for Garcetti. Can we post that in the chat?
Yeah, and I sent it to you by email because I couldn't upload it to the chat. I think I'm a panelist rather than a host today. So if you can post that, that would be helpful. I also see our friend Paul Little from the Pasadena Chamber has sent a question about Governor Newsom announcing that California will reopen as of June 15. Is that realistic? Does it mean with no restrictions on capacity indoor or out? It's realistic assuming vaccinations continue to grow and case rates continue to be modest and declining. It is not clear that there will be no restrictions as of June 15. I think there will continue to be restrictions on large public event attendance, convention attendance, perhaps even movie theater occupancy. I think the idea is that we can get back to indoor dining and no restrictions on retail store occupancy at any given time. But there is some lack of clarity around that. Perhaps intentionally, the state may be awaiting continued vaccination progress and case rate evaluation before getting abundantly clear on that. But yes, full reopening we think is realistic. Vaccination pacing, as we said, is going well, even despite the temporary pause in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. As I understand it, the county will receive 600,000 doses this week. And so we'll continue to make good progress. I think in the state, 53% of all California adults have received at least a first dose. I think somewhere around 20 or 30% have received a second dose. And the numbers per week continue to climb. So everyone, at least adults, should be able to receive vaccines by that June 15 date, which is, I think, why that date was chosen. As we learn more about capacity restrictions on larger events, we'll certainly try and share those with all of you. But no, I don't believe that June 15 means no capacity restrictions on any kind of business.
Thank you, Bill. In regards to the unemployment funds and trying to encourage people to actually get back to work, is there a concern there, and how are we addressing some of those concerns with our own partners and local businesses?
So Shannon may be able to speak to this more clearly than I, but clearly this has been a topic of conversation all across the country. I saw it on CNBC early this morning. The number of people who are hesitant to go back to work, particularly in lower paying jobs, if they're receiving relatively generous unemployment compensation. Some of it is a financial decision that certain individuals may be making. Some of it's a decision based on their responsibilities in the home to provide care for children who are not yet back in school, to provide care for other relatives in the family until childcare services are more abundantly available. Some of it is a safety issue. Some people just are not yet comfortable coming back to work, knowing that either they haven't been vaccinated or other people in the workplace may not have been vaccinated. As we understand it, it is not yet possible for people to require their employees to be vaccinated because the vaccine is offered under emergency use authorization. It isn't formally approved by the FDA. So I think we'll continue to see some hesitancy to accept employment opportunities or even to aggressively pursue employment opportunities. As Shannon's numbers showed, the labor force is not yet fully back to where it was prior to the pandemic, because some people are making the decision not yet to actively seek work. But most people have noted that I think in September, the current round of unemployment insurance benefits will run out again. It's highly unlikely that they'll be extended much beyond that.
Yeah.
And so it may be that once everyone has had that chance to be vaccinated and those benefits start to decline or run out, the people and childcare options and schooling options will be available again, that more people will actively seek employment and accept opportunities to get even their old job back. Shannon, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a little bit. This is a really tough question because you have to remember that your California unemployment benefits, they cap out at $450 a week. So currently, the program's in place. It's a supplemental benefit of $300 per week added on top of whatever amount that person earns. If that person is not working full hours, if they have a lower wage job, they might not even earn that $450. So assuming they do, your $300 supplemental payment puts them above the living wage, which makes things affordable. Now, it does kind of discourage if you're earning more, but to go back to work, maybe you might hesitate. The other thing you have to consider is you might have workers that are facing reduced hours. So perhaps some of their places of employment aren't offering the full amount of hours that they had pre-pandemic. They're offering a part-time gig that might not pay what's going to be what they can earn through employment assistance. So you have a $300 supplemental benefit, which is half of what it originally was under the first supplemental program, because that was one of the criticisms, is that that supplemental benefit was too high. So it did ratchet down. And as Bill mentioned, this program does expire on September 4th. So it's a temporary thing, and it might be a growing pain, but it will rectify itself eventually.
I see a question, Shane, about the housing market. Is the housing boom in a bubble? Again, Shannon may have more learned observations to share. I don't believe it's in a bubble. I think we continue to have an undersupply of housing to meet the demand in this market and all throughout Southern California and probably throughout most of the state. And that's why prices continue to appreciate. That could change based on interest rates. If interest rates remain low, people can afford to buy a home. As those interest rates move up, it makes it even harder to afford a home in what is a very high-priced housing market. So I think interest rates rising significantly, which is not likely in the next year or two, could certainly temper the growth of housing prices. But unless we start building an awful lot more homes, or people decide they're not looking for them, I don't think a bubble is on the horizon. Shannon, your thoughts?
I don't think there's a bubble on the horizon. I do want to point out that this is also something you can point to as a tale of two recoveries. And what I mean by that is you have your higher income earners, workers, that really were relatively unaffected. So their buying habits they weren't altered much other than forced shifts. And in fact, a lot of the spending that they would normally spend on restaurants and entertainment, which weren't options for them, became savings, or it became spending on recreational goods, such as campers or bicycles or some kind of activity that they could purchase to take that place. On the other end of the spectrum, you have lower income earners that are in service industries that were disproportionately impacted. And in those instances, you have people that may be struggling to pay their rent. So we're waiting to see what happens when the eviction moratoriums actually end, because that's going to impact housing a little bit too, especially in renting. We're definitely in a market where we don't have enough housing. We need to build housing, no matter what. And so if you're wondering why you see all this activity, just remember that activity are from workers with higher incomes that haven't been impacted, that have now extra savings because they're not spending on a daily basis as much as they were when they're in the workplace.
I see a question about new business starts. I don't have data on that. I'm not sure whether Shannon has that. There is some data that exists. I just don't know if we have it, at our fingertips today to share. But I see the question about city ordinances for hero pay and whether they've affected retail employment numbers. I don't know that we've looked at that yet. But I do know that in the case of Kroger, who has closed a couple of stores in Long Beach and Los Angeles, apparently, ostensibly, according to them, as a result of being required to pay the hero pay, that they've offered positions in their other stores to all the staff that are being laid off of those stores that are closing. So it doesn't appear that that's necessarily impacting retail employment numbers in those stores. I would also note and share with you all, when you get a chance to look at the Federal Investment Guide on the American Rescue Plan, it actually has a component of fiscal relief for cities that includes the ability for cities or counties to provide hero pay themselves using American Rescue Plan dollars for essential workers in key industries in their market. And they can do it in one of two ways. They can either provide hero pay, or they can provide grants to employers of essential workers to be able to provide hero pay, so that they don't have to require what may be still struggling retailers to do that themselves. So it's worth looking into that, as we have, I think, a collective interest in thanking and rewarding the people who put themselves at risk to keep our economy going and keep food on the shelves for us, but recognizing that it does put a strain on certain retailers when they're required to pay that after making other expensive investments to get through the pandemic. So that rescue plan allocation of hero pay dollars could be an interesting option for cities and counties here and throughout the state and nation.
So our next question is from our friend Praful. California Community College enrollment is down. Normally that goes up in recessions with training. Do you have any evidence, or can you explain why that may be?
I don't have any intimate knowledge of why enrollment is down in our community colleges. I'm sure our community colleges know very well why, and I would hate to speak on their behalf. So I don't know if any of our community college representatives are on the call today, but I would much rather let them answer that question. I'm sure some of it is economic. I'm sure there are other factors as well, including the Distance learning, I know, was an impact. There were a lot of community college students who lacked the internet access and the availability of devices to continue learning. Others who even were provided with hotspots and devices still struggled in the distance learning environment and may have chosen to wait to enroll later when they could get back into classrooms. But I'm sure there are a number of other factors. And as I say, perhaps some of our wonderful community college representatives might want to post in the chat some of the primary reasons. It is an area of significant concern, as our community colleges are the front line for providing the training, the retraining, the upskilling for many of the jobs that have been displaced and for many of the jobs that are newly emerging as a result of the changing nature of consumer behavior and business behavior in a post-pandemic economy.
And we do have a question here from actually one of our colleagues. But in the presentation, the slides showed that in LA County, spending is up. However, small business revenue is running fairly flat. What does this mean? And kind of what are the speculations on how we can help encourage people to start spending locally?
Again, Shannon may have some more specific thoughts. I think clearly a lot of us shifted from small business brick and mortar relationships to larger business e-commerce relationships. We found ourselves not visiting local clothing stores, but ordering clothing from Amazon, not visiting local restaurants, but ordering food from national chains, going to grocery stores, having groceries delivered. There were a lot of larger employers who benefited at the expense of smaller employers as we spent the money we had from continuing working or monies we received from unemployment benefit programs. We do have to focus on our small business recovery. There have to be concerted efforts. And I will tell you, cities across this county are doing remarkable things in terms of promoting their local commercial corridors, their local businesses, their local restaurants, making it possible for restaurants, for instance, to do outdoor dining beyond just in their own patios, but out on sidewalks, literally out in streets that close down on certain days or times of day for outdoor dining. The more we can do to buy local, to celebrate our small businesses, will be critical to their recovery. Shannon's data was troubling to see.
Yeah, and we have time for one last question. Have you come across any data that is showing what the new jobs that are emerging post-pandemic?
We are definitely experiencing that more knowledge-based occupations that are requiring technical skills are those that are really pulling ahead, especially during the pandemic when everything moved remotely. What we're seeing also right now that's not emerging is a recovery. So the largest job growth that we're seeing and that we'll probably see in the next month or so are going to be jobs added back to service sectors that now are open. And as people are feeling more comfortable, there's that pent up demand of getting out. I mean, we've all been kind of relegated to our space, however large or small that may be, for quite some time. And so with case numbers on getting lower, with people getting vaccinated, with restrictions easing, we're moving out, and the jobs that are growing fastest are going to be the ones that are going to be returning back to the payrolls in order to provide services for people who are looking for it. But in terms of what's emerging and pulling out ahead of the pack, it's going to be and it was something we were already seeing when we were doing a lot of this work for community colleges and diving into occupations and new skills. It was a phenomenon that we were already seeing prior to the pandemic, was this move towards more tech-intensive occupations, and not only just tech-intensive occupations, but traditional occupations requiring more tech to complete their job duties. And it looks different across different industries, which is why I didn't give you an example of any.
I just wanted to add one more point about the question about supporting our small businesses. I mentioned some of the things our cities are doing to support the reopening of our small businesses. There's also other things we can do and are doing across this county, which is waiving certain permit and health fees for these small businesses, reflecting the substantially reduced operations that they have available to them now, reflecting the fact that many of them were closed for a considerable period of time. The American Rescue Plan, again, provides specific relief to cities and counties and encourages them to pass on some of that relief directly to the small businesses in their community. Small businesses, largely locally owned, are where a significant place where local wealth is built. And small businesses in our lower income communities, our communities of color, have been significant opportunities for wealth building. And given the enormous wealth disparities that still exist across this county, shoring up our small business community is a really critical strategy to encouraging an equitable recovery across this county. So we will devote more attention to it as the LAEDC, and we encourage all of our partners on this call to devote more attention to it in the weeks and months to come. As I said in my opening remarks, our small businesses are by no means out of the woods yet. Shannon's data makes that clear. We all have a lot more work to do to ensure that these struggling survivors of this pandemic become thriving survivors in the years ahead.
Thank you so much, Bill. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap. Thank you, Bill and Shannon, for your comments, as well as answering these questions, and Shannon, for your wonderful presentation. As we wrap up, I am going to share this final slide with everyone. And just to remind everyone, again, you will receive a link to access the recording as well as the slide deck from today's presentation. And as I mentioned in the chat box, we will also post a PDF of the American Rescue Plan at that link because unfortunately we were unable to upload that into the chat today. And we always encourage all of our partners to visit the LAEDC COVID-19 response page for additional resources at laedc.org/coronavirus. And if you have any other questions following today's webinar, please send those directly to me at shane.cullen@laedc.org, and I will be sure to forward that on to the appropriate colleagues to help get your questions answered. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us for this April installment of our monthly economic implications briefings, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe at work.